The presidential race will no doubt leave us with many images. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. And photographers are snapping photos even as we speak. David Lienemann was a White House photographer for former Vice President Joe Biden before his run for the presidency this year. He's collected images of the man from Delaware in his new book, Biden, the Obama Years, and the Battle for the Soul of America. Being an official photographer, he says, is a 6 to 7 day job with flights to over 30 countries on Air Force Two, and we have him on the phone this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Don.
So what was that like, moving from, say, freelance to this really full-time, almost 24/7 kind of job?
Sure, it was really an incredible experience. Working as a journalist, I'd covered politics before, but it's not really the same as being there every day, all the time, in all the meetings. And so I went from being a 24-year-old journalist to being a White House photographer, and it was just a really incredible experience.
So in the foreword by Jill Biden, she says that a good photographer goes unnoticed and captures those scenes, the most intimate moments, but without disrupting that fragile moment. Do you think about that when you're taking these photos, and how do you kind of stay out of the way even as these events unfold?
Sure. I think my background in journalism obviously helps with that. And, as a journalist, you're not making the story, right? You're there covering the story and showing people what happened, but you're not in the story. And I tried to do exactly the same thing at the White House. I tried to be quiet and unobtrusive. I used quiet cameras, and I tried to capture moments and not be in the way. I am sure I knocked something over during a meeting in my 8 years, but I really did try to be very unobtrusive. And I guess I should have started that by thanking Dr. Biden, who was so generous to write the foreword for the book.
And in the photos, you talk about a man who knows America, its people, and its promise. How did you see that from the photos that you took?
That's an interesting question. I think that the vice president grew up in Scranton and then Claremont, Delaware, in a really, very working class neighborhood and kind of a working class family. And I think because he took the train home every night to Delaware from Washington when he was senator, he never really forgot where he came from or the people that he was serving. And knowing what it's like to worry about where your next paycheck's coming from, or if you're going to be able to buy your kids new shoes. And I think that makes him such an empathetic leader who really understands the American experience, I think, outside of the D.C. bubble. And that really spoke to me, and I think there are photos that reflect that in the book.
So what is, do you think, out of all the photos you took something like 900,000, I think is the figure I saw. Is there a set of photos that stand out to you that captures who Biden is?
There's a couple photos that I guess I would say are favorites in the book, which doesn't exactly answer your question. I have a photograph of the vice president from 2012, and it's backstage at the Democratic National Convention. It's, a packed arena. There's thousands of people cheering, and there's all this energy. And the vice president and Dr. Biden are standing there waiting to go out on stage. And Beau Biden, who was then the Attorney General in Delaware, reaches over and is just gently adjusting his father's tie. And there's something so personal and intimate and loving about that photo that I really, it's always been a favorite photo of mine. And then I think there's another photo that speaks to me as well, and I have to back up a little bit. In 2012, the vice president came out in favor of same-sex marriage, and he performed one wedding during his 8 years in the White House, and it was to marry two colleagues of mine, Brian and Joe. And that always, I think, I didn't realize at the time I took the pictures kind of what it meant or how historically significant it was. And in hindsight, it's just this really, I think, important record of progress in our country towards equality.
In a number of photos, you have Biden interacting with ordinary people, whether it's on the rope line or if it's being hugged by people. Um, what stands out to you about that? I know that there was one child who said that he just had to hug Biden, and actually was afraid that as he was crying that they got the tears on the suit.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to who the vice president is sort of this this ordinary American. I think it's hard for people to imagine that their politicians are like them, that understand what it's like to be middle class, and I think the vice president really does, and I think that allows him to connect to voters in a different way than really anyone else I've worked for. And yeah, he took a huge amount of time at every event to shake every hand that he could, and to hug people and to hear from them, whether that's on the rope line or, coming out of an ice cream shop and seeing people across the street and running across the street to say hello. It's who he is.
Do you think is the chemistry then between him and these basically regular folks who he encounters?
I think he's willing to talk to them and willing to hear from them, and I think that that makes people need to be heard, right? People want their politicians to be willing to talk to them and be willing to hear from them, and he's willing and able to do that, and has been doing that for decades as senator from Delaware.
By the way, and he is a hugger, isn't he?
Yes.
I mean, do you see that with other politicians, or is this something special to him?
I think some politicians do, and I think there's sort of the cliche about kissing babies on the rope line, that politicians are always looking for a baby to hold, but no, I think that's who he is. He's that way with a firefighter that he knows in Delaware, and he's that way with his grandkid. He's just he's a very friendly person.
So, in terms of his relationship with Obama, how do you see that played out, particularly in your photos? I think there's one where he's actually hugging Obama at one point.
Mm-hmm. I think the photo you're referring to is actually from Burr's funeral in Delaware in 2015. I think they started out friendly. Certainly Senate colleagues working together as president and vice president, but I think that relationship really grew and developed over the 8 years, and they had lunch every week together, just a private lunch with the two of them, and I think it gave them an opportunity to get to know each other better. And
okay, and you're drifting just a little there. He also seems to have a special, I think, relationship in some of your photos with children. There are a number of them in which he's leaning forward or he's talking to them. Tell me a little bit about those.
Me too, and I think if you as a person are willing to get down to their level and talk to them and treat them like they have something important to say, then they feel special and heard, and the vice president does that with kids all over the country.
So what is it about that connection with him? I mean, he seems to have a great affection for them. Obviously, he has his own children, grandchildren. Do you think he sees them as sort of an extended part of his own family?
That's interesting. I'd never really thought about it that way. I don't know. I mean, I think kids are fun. I have a little girl myself. She's 17 months old, and kids do funny things and they say funny things, and I think he treats everyone equally, and if you're going to stand there and talk to their parents, then you should get down on your knees and talk to their kids too. And why not? I mean, they have just as much of a right to be heard as their parents do.
Now, he also seems to have a special relationship, certainly through your photographs, of the military. Not only those folks who obviously are out in Afghanistan, but also those who have been wounded. A number of photos, I think, of of folks, military folks who lost their legs. Tell me a little bit about that. Is there any particular shot that comes to mind on that?
The vice president and Dr. Biden, who, whose own son served in Iraq for a year, have a very powerful connection with military families, and both those who served and also their loved ones at home. I think they see both sides of that, and are very aware of what that is like for hundreds of thousands of people across our country who've been willing to serve our country and to deploy overseas. So I just would say that at first, but I think if you're willing to sort of take the flag waving and the military homecomings and everything else, it's really important to go meet people who lost their legs serving our country or their arms, and to meet and hear from them too, because their experience is unfortunately part of having our troops in war around the world. And not only did they do that, not only did they go to the military hospitals to meet with folks who were receiving treatment, and the rehab facilities where they're learning how to walk again with prosthetics, learning how to dress themselves again. But they also went to Arlington and other veteran cemeteries to meet with family members who were there grieving soldiers who unfortunately did not come home alive. So I think, again, that military family connection that they have with the service of their son Bo is just really, they understand and feel and live that experience, and I think that gives them a very powerful connection with veterans.
As a matter of fact, there's one shot in particular, if you can describe it for me, where he is out, I believe, in Arlington Cemetery. I don't know, is comforting a person who appears as if they had lost someone.
It feels like this really personal moment, I think, for them, right? He's standing there. I think in one photograph, I'm not sure which one you're talking about, he's speaking to a widow and her children at the gravesite of their husband, husband, and it feels like this powerful moment. But I think it's important for people to remember that it's not just, again, it's not just flag waving and flyovers. There is this really real cost to war for the folks that come home either with visible wounds, what we think about as an amputation, but also who are suffering from PTSD or exposure to chemicals or who have nightmares, concussions. I mean, there is a cost of war, and it's not just monetary.
Tell me, I want to turn to Beau Biden, because that was obviously a very special relationship, one that Biden had said that it was a deciding factor in not running in 2016. What was that relationship like, and what are the photographs do you think capture about that relationship?
The relationship between the vice president and Beau?
And Vice, yes.
Sure. I think they had a very close relationship. I think that probably goes back, honestly, to when the vice president was first elected to the Senate, before he was even sworn in. His first wife and their little girl were killed in a car accident, and the two boys, Beau and Hunter, were badly wounded in that accident, and the vice president ended up being sworn in to the Senate at their hospital bedside in Delaware. So I think he's, as a father, has always, really made family a priority. His kids, his grandkids, they used to call during meetings sometimes to talk to him, and he would, just stop the meeting and get on the phone and talk with the kids for a couple minutes. So I think they had a really close relationship. I think the vice president probably saw some of himself in Beau, who was also a politician, who ran for attorney general in Delaware and had planned to run for governor before he died of cancer. So I think they had a close relationship. I think he's always referred to Beau as being his heart, and just sort of reminding him to think about things and how it bringing it back to home base. So a very close relationship.
And you have one photograph of Biden touching the flag-draped coffin of his older son. Tell me about that and that moment.
It was in 2015. I was at the morning of there was I guess a public visitation at the church in Wilmington, Delaware, and the family got there first so they could have a couple minutes before they opened the door, and thousands of people lined up and came through that day to pay their respects to the family. And but the photograph that you're talking about, he's kneeling in front of the casket at the front of the church, and he's got his head down and he's got his hand out and he's just touching the flag. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Just this powerful and for me at least still painful image, 5 years later, to think about losing your child.
And at one point, I guess it was President Obama eulogized Biden's son, and there's a quote, I think, says, "Joe, you are my brother." And it sounds like they had a real connection, emotional connection that went beyond just simply the various offices that they held.
Absolutely. I think working together on a daily basis over 8 years, made them very close. And the president's children and the vice president's grandchildren played on a basketball team together in Washington, D.C. And so on Saturday mornings, they often would both be sitting in the stands at a gymnasium in Maryland, cheering for their kids' basketball team together. I know the kids and the grandkids had sleepovers together. I think they went to a camp together one summer, maybe. I don't pretend to know all of the grandkid activities, but no, I think the families became very close.
You also refer to another moment, which was at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, where the parishioners were shot, and shortly, apparently after Bo's death. And you say that First Lady Michelle Obama reached over and quietly squeezed the Vice President's shoulder, what described as a small gesture that told a much bigger story about the two families. Tell me about that moment and what you saw.
Sure. I think it was 2 weeks after the funeral, Bo's funeral. And there had been, unfortunately, I guess, a mass shooting at the Mother Emmanuel AME Church, and the president and the vice president were both there for the memorial service for the folks, and they were waiting backstage, and I think the First Lady kind of looked over at the VP and just saw the emotions running across his face because, he's still thinking about Bo. He's thinking about all these new folks who've lost loved ones that they're going to meet with. And I think she just, was trying to kind of give him a hug and a little bit of comfort in what was a really trying time for his family, but also for the country, too.
And I think he also was there for the laying of the wreaths for the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting as well.
That's correct. He and the president went down and took a couple of hours, as I recall, and met with the families of the people who lost their lives. They met with some of the folks who had survived, and then also met with the staff from that nightclub. And then at the very end, sort of the public-facing side of that, they went out and laid wreaths at a temporary memorial site. So.
And Biden seems to be, in many ways, he does seem to be an emotional person, someone who obviously can cry, perhaps not as much as John Boehner, the former House Speaker, but nonetheless you can see that. And I think at one moment when he was awarded the Medal of Freedom, the tears came to his eyes.
Absolutely, and a couple other times too, of course. But no, I think he's a real human being. He's not a coached, staged person, and there are good moments and bad moments, and I think you'll see a lot of emotions in the book. You're going to see some really I think folks will get to see some wonderful moments with his children and his grandchildren, and I think they're going to see some really hard moments for he and his family and our country as well. The Medal of Freedom, I guess, is an interesting intersection of those, because it's, this really great moment for him, and the president sort of honoring his service to the country and talking about all the things that he's done, and at the same time, he's obviously very emotional about it.
So they head towards the end of their administration. Obviously, they're confronted by the fact that the President Trump, the candidate Trump, was about to take office. What was that atmosphere like? I mean, from the photos we get, certainly a certain amount of formality in terms of their interaction, certainly with the Trumps and so on. What was that atmosphere like?
Sure. I think, I think it's not a purely political exercise at the White House. Like, everyone isn't sitting around thinking about running a race. You are also thinking about all the things you're doing in the country from a policy perspective. Trying to improve access to education and healthcare, and safe food and clean drinking water. I think there's so many things that the government does that aren't the political things that we all think about. But if you're asking if they were unhappy about how the election turned out, then yes, I'm certain that was the case. I think there was certainly a lot of disappointment. I think there was also a recognition that there were still 2 months to go and there was still work to do. And the president had asked the vice president to head up this cancer moonshot initiative where they were working to advance cancer research, and he delivered a report on that in December. But then there are all of the goodbyes too. The saying goodbye to White House staff, to the butlers who had served them over the years, the Medal of Freedom, as you mentioned earlier. And then, the vice president sat down the morning of the inauguration and wrote Vice President Pence a letter, which I did not read and don't know what it says. I'm sure the two of them do, and left it on his desk for him. So,
matter of fact, you have, I believe, a photo of that.
Yes, there is a photo of that in the book. He came in and they had cleared out, all of the art and the personal pictures, and all of your sort of office things that you take home at the end of a job. And so he came in that morning, and there's 2 couches and 2 chairs and a desk, and he sat down at the desk and wrote the vice president a letter, the incoming vice president a letter, and walked over to the White House for the sort of welcome tea coffee ceremony they have with the Senate and House leadership and the incoming administration. So I think it's really fascinating to think about that transition of power, and how for centuries now we've had this peaceful transition of power after our elections, and you don't cling to power at the end. You get reelected or you don't, and in this case they obviously weren't running for reelection, and then then the next person takes over.
You also seem to point to the fact that I know that Biden is a religious man. I think you have a shot of him, holding some rosary beads. Tell me a little bit about that side of him that doesn't necessarily always come out during particularly a campaign.
Sure. It's funny you ask that, because it not only doesn't come out during the campaign necessarily, but it didn't really, I didn't go to church with him on Sunday morning. That was sort of a private, personal thing that he did most of the time. And, I was more aware of it when we were traveling, just because they would, he would either come in and drop by a service, or, a priest would come in and meet with him privately at the hotel if we were overseas, especially. But he is a deeply religious man, and he does go to church. I would say every week. I'm certain he's probably missed a week in there somewhere, but it is part of who he is. It's part of his life. It's part of his upbringing. He attended Catholic schools, and The photo you referenced is when the Pope came to the United States on an official visit, and a state visit, I guess, and they had this service outside the Basilica in Washington D.C., and the Vice President attended, and he's sitting there, and they're just rows and rows of folding chairs out on the lawn, basically, because there were so many people there, and he was just sitting there, and he was fingering through the rosary beads, and I just took this really tight photo of his hands and the cross. It was something a little different, and it was kind of a nice detail.
So on a lighter note, tell me about the famous aviator sunglasses there. He seems to sport them a lot. Seems almost I think it's almost a symbol in his campaign.
Sure. I think the president once joked that he might have a sponsorship from Ray-Ban, which he does not. But no, my understanding, he's worn them for most of his life. Dr. Biden also wears them. It was pretty funny when you get the grandkids involved too, because sometimes you got 5 or 6 people walking around in aviators. But no, I think there's a couple photos in the book. There's one where they're sitting on his desk, and he's working. The sunglasses are kind of toward the front of the desk, and they're in focus, and he's in the background working on papers. There's another photograph where I think it was actually a taping with the president for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and they were doing this sort of funny video, and save you the whole script, but the gist of it is the vice president's asking the president which set of aviators better reflect his mood. The joke, of course, being because they're all the same.
Right.
He's got a whole row of them there on the table in front of him.
Now, you could be in Delaware, I believe.
Yes, I am doing a virtual book event. I'm sure it's called something fancier than that, at Browse Books in Rehoboth. And I'll be talking about the book and some of the photos in it, and kind of sharing my behind-the-scenes insights, and then probably taking some questions from folks. And I'm actually supposed to get in the mail today, hopefully, a box of book plates, which I will be signing and sending to the store, so that folks who are picking up their copies can have them signed in a less personal way than normally would happen for a book talk. But yeah.
When is that, by the way?
I'm so sorry, I don't actually know. I clearly should have had that up.
Well, later this month, I think, right?
I think it's next week, but I am
sure.
I have a couple a week, and so they're just scheduled out on my calendar. And the disappointing part about it is that I don't get to go meet people and sort of hear from them in person. But it's also nice to be able to be home with my little girl and not have to get on a plane. It's September 22nd. I believe it's at 7 p.m. East Coast time. And the information about it is on the Browse Books website. I think folks can register there. I think they can pre-order, or I guess it's not pre-ordering anymore because the book's out. They can order the book there as well. And those signed book plates should hopefully be there by this weekend.
Well, we were speaking with David Lienemann. He was a White House photographer for former Vice President Joe Biden before, of course, Biden's run for the presidency this year. And he's collected images of the man from Delaware in his new book, Biden, the Obama Years and the Battle for the Soul of America. We appreciate you taking time to talk with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great to be with you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.